All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. It is my pleasure to welcome back our speaker for today, Gary Zaretsky, who's going to be talking about Grant Castner, who was a Trenton photographer. And this kind of coincides with the exhibit that's currently on display at the New Jersey State Museum, that has about 100 of his prints that were created from some of the glass plate negatives that were somewhat recently donated to the museum. So Gary's going to be talking about Grant, his life, and his photography. But before we jump into Gary's presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. We will be taking your questions at the end of Gary's presentation, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. There will be a survey available at the end of the webinar. So if you have time, we ask that you please complete the survey. We always appreciate your feedback. And if you'd like more information on Grant Castner, a video, about a 7-minute video was created, and you can watch it at the PBS link there. I will send that out in the chat so that you can have that to view at your leisure. And one last thing is just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device, like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure that it is connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you're having. And if you do have any questions, again, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat buttons. Either of them will get in touch with us and we'll be happy to address those questions at the end of Gary's presentation. So that is everything that I have for you. So happy to turn it over to Gary now.
Hi, hello folks. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started. So here we go. Hope everybody can see that.
Looks good.
All right. Well, the Grant Castner exhibit at the State Museum opened on February 15th, and it's there until September the 15th. It's been very well received. Quite a few people have seen it, and we've gotten some good feedback on it. The curator of the exhibit was Nick Chodala, who's on the State Museum staff, and he brought me in as a consultant, so that's how I got involved. So I want to thank some of these folks here. William Paquin somehow acquired the Castner archive. We don't know how, but after he died, his stepfather, who was his executor, donated the collection to the New Jersey State Museum in his memory. And then Nick Chodala took charge of it. The library staff scanned all the glass plate negatives, and then a selection was made for the exhibit. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Grant Castner and the exhibit. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the entire exhibit, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more in depth about one of the 11 rooms in the exhibit because it's divided into 11 sections. I can't do all of those, so I'm just going to do one. This is Grant. Grant Castner was born in Belvidere on the Delaware River, one end of the Belvidere Railroad that went between Trenton and Belvidere. And his father had a bookstore there on Front Street, and Grant became a avid reader. In fact, he started writing also, and he published, as a teenager, he published a small newspaper for 3 years in Belvidere. There's only 2 known issues of that newspaper that are still known today. Here's Grant's father. This was in the collection. This is a carte de visite, about 2 by 4 inches from 1862 by a photographer named George Auxer, who was in Belvidere for a year and then moved on to Hightstown and then later other parts of New Jersey. So Grant leaves Belvidere and he goes to the Trenton Business College, which is now Rider University. And then he went to Philadelphia. He had a job in Philadelphia for a short period of time, but then he came back to Trenton, where his older married sister, Anna, lived. And he moved in with her, and he lived with her for all the years until he got married, which was more than 15 years. And so he had a very close relationship with his siblings. And there, beginning in the 1880s, he started becoming a photographer. He might have tried doing it earlier, but we don't have any work from an earlier period. And amateur photography really took off uh, after 1880 because previously photographers, for the most part, were using what were called collodion wet plate negatives. The photographer took a piece of glass and then under darkroom conditions, like very subdued light or under a yellow light, they would coat the plate with light sensitive chemicals, and then they would put it into a holder, and then the holder would go into the camera before the chemicals dried. So that's why it was called the wet plate process. And then they had to take the picture, the negative out, go back into this dark room, and then develop it still before it dried. So if you traveled, you had to have a dark room with you. So this, of course, made outdoor photography rather inconvenient, and professionals did it, but amateurs tended not to get too involved with it. So once gelatin dry plates were introduced, and gelatin dry plates came ready to use in a box, they looked pretty much like collodion negatives, but they were already coated and sensitized to light. You could load up your negative holders, go on a trip, take pictures, and then bring them home and then develop them after you got home. So in the 1880s, amateur photography starts to become popular and camera clubs start forming, including in New Jersey, beginning in New Brunswick, with the earliest one in 1886. So collodion negatives also had the advantage that they were 10 times more sensitive to light, and that enables more stop action photography, like at the end of horse races, as a notable example. But they were certainly so much more convenient than collodion in a lot of ways. And Castner usually labeled his negative envelopes, and these are the boxes. These are actually, this is a picture from the exhibit showing his some of the boxes that his negatives came in, and he's then after processing them, he would store them in the boxes. And one of the boxes that's at the top of the screen here is the Stanley dry plate uh, negatives that were made by Eastman Kodak. And if we go to the next slide, here's one of his negative envelopes, and up near the top, you can see it says he wrote Stanley plate. So we know that's the kind of negative he used for this particular picture of what called in camp along the Delaware River near Stockton in 1896. He also mentions near the bottom where I have the arrow there that he printed this negative on Velox paper. Now, Velox was what became, it was known familiarly as gaslight paper because when it was introduced, it was actually before most photographers had electric light, but you could develop this paper at night, which was very convenient for amateurs. So previously, printing was done in the sun. So if you had a job during the day, that wasn't very convenient for you. So this type of paper, which was coated with a gelatin coating on paper with a light sensitive silver bromide primarily, this type of paper, you could expose it either through contact with the negative or in an enlarger. and then there would be an invisible latent image on the in the paper, and then you would dunk the paper into a tray of chemicals developer, and then the image would magically appear. And then you would put it into a fixing bath, which would stop the action of the development, and then wash it, and then you'd have your print. And Castner might have had this in an instruction manual like this. There were also other literature that told you how to use it. It was not too difficult. And this is a sample. This is not one of Castner's, but this is a sample print that was in a magazine in 1897, around the time that Castner worked. These prints are subject to silver tarnish, as you can see in the lower left here. So Castner helped to form the first camera club in Trenton in 1898. He was the secretary of the club, and the other members were actually younger. Of the other officers were younger than he was at that point. He was in his 30s. Some of the other guys were in their 20s. And a few years later, he got married, and then he moved two doors down from his married sister, where he had been living on Tyler Street in Trenton. Sarah Frances Kerr, you see here with their son Theodore. Um, she was known as Fanny, and she was a friend of Grant's younger sister, Ida, who also moved to Trenton and was living with the other sister, the married sister. And Ida then becomes one of Grant's cohorts as far as going around and taking pictures, because she appears in a lot of the pictures that he took. The Castners had two children, Theodore, seen here, who was born in 1904, and a girl, Eleanor, in 1907. Now, Castner worked as a distribution agent for the Union News Company. That was his how he made his living. And they distributed newspapers and magazines at newsstands found at railroad stations all over New Jersey. So sometimes Castner would go and visit these places, and he would take his camera along. And this is the one in Merchantville in Camden County. This kiosk is not there anymore, but the railroad station that you see a little bit of to the left is actually still there. Just say a little bit about the images that you're seeing, and the ones that are printed for the exhibit. You're seeing the entire negative here. The black line that goes around the image is actually the area where the negative holder covered up the light sensitive portion of the negative. When Castner printed his own pictures, he probably did some cropping in some cases where he would cover up part of the original negative. But when we displayed them in the museum, we show you the full frame just as he saw it. So around 1912, Castner started self-identifying as a photographer in the city directories, but he continued working as a sales agent for magazine publishers. And so he did some jobs apparently on assignment, and there are a few images in the exhibit that look like he was hired to do them. For example, a picture of school children in the classroom, that's posed, and some other pictures that he might have been hired to do. But primarily, the collection I would say, is his personal work. He may have done some other commercial work that the negatives he didn't keep them or something, or he gave them to the client. We don't know. We can only go by what we have. So Castner died in 1941, and he was buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Hamilton Township. And here is Castner's grave with Nick Chodola, the curator for the Castner exhibit. So the collection itself contains more than 1,000 glass plate negatives of various sizes. up to 8 by 10. Almost all of them are taken in New Jersey and in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. There's a handful that were taken elsewhere. There's a couple taken in Rochester, New York, and I think also maybe Niagara Falls. He took a picture there. And he took a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. So there are a few outside of New York and New Jersey, but the vast majority are New York and Pennsylvania, New Jersey and Pennsylvania, mostly New Jersey. And within New Jersey, there's a predominance of photos taken around Trenton. There are some prints, but not a lot. And there's also some glass positives, which were used for projection. Those are the precursors of what most of you probably remember as Kodachrome, or Ektachrome slides. But photographers in those days, they would contact print their negatives to make glass positives, and those would be put in projectors, and they would have slideshows at the camera clubs, and then they would exchange glass slides with other camera clubs. And I'll show you an example of one of those lantern slides a little bit later. So now I'll give you some installation views of the exhibit so you can see what it looks like. This is when you first walk in, there's this gigantic panel behind the front desk at the museum. And there's Castner with his camera at Stony Brook in Princeton. I'm not sure which bridge this is. It might be the one uh, on Princeton Pike, or it might be the one on Route 206. And the exhibit is divided up into 11 thematic sections with a total of 100 framed prints. There's also a slideshow with 200 images, including the 100 that are framed, and then another 100. And then as you go through the gallery, there are exhibit cases, also known as vitrines, with artifacts from the museum's collection that relate to the content of the photo. So, for example, uh, in the top view here on the left, you see a vitrine with two dolls, and then the next image is a photograph by Castner of his daughter holding a doll. So you can see what a doll looked like from that time period. A lot of these objects have never been on exhibit before, since they were donated. Some of them donated to the museum many years ago, but there had never previously been an occasion for them to be taken out. Um, this particular view is part of the section called Family. And on the right, there's an image of Kastner's Christmas tree with his wife, and a bunch of Christmas presents at the bottom, which if you see that in detail, you can see all the different toys that, that his son was getting that year. Each of the thematic sections is introduced by a large panel. This is the section on canals, and I'm going to be coming back to canals and riverways as the focus of this talk. And then there's a text that goes along to introduce that particular section. And this is a view of the slideshow. So the themes in the show are family, which I mentioned. That's the first section actually in the exhibit as you start walking through, and then neighbors, uh, people who live mostly in Trenton, or on occasion some other places, and then the section on the city, which is almost exclusively views of Trenton. Then there's a section on work, which are people at work. And he was very good at making subjects feel comfortable. Sometimes he would take candid shots of people working. Other times they would stop what they were doing and 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 pose for him. Then he photographed schools in the Trenton area. And then there's a section on canal, and canal includes the canals on both sides of the Delaware River. This is just some sample views of from some of those sections. This is from the family section. And I'm going to show you a few images that are actually not in the show from these thematic groups. The Castner family like to go to the Jersey Shore, just as a lot of people do now, including me, and go there in the summer for recreation. And this is from the city section. This shows after a blizzard, you can see a horse-drawn streetcar there, and people walking around, and there's a dog crossing the street, and a lot of wires for electricity and telephone poles. And you can see the stores and the signs on the stores in these views. Castner did quite a few photographs of African Americans, which was a subject that not a lot of white photographers went out of their way to do in those days. This woman is doing her sewing and looks very comfortable having her portrait made. And you can see that Castner very carefully composed this image. It's beautifully composed. This is we don't know the name of this image, and I'm showing you what the original negative looked like with some damage, which looks like ribbons that are coming down, but those are actually cracks in the emulsion on the negative. Um, and in the exhibit, this photo, you won't see that, and because we've digitally restored it. And we did some digital restoration where it was needed to make the images look like what we think Kastner would have wanted. There's some cases where you'll see photos that have obvious damage to the negatives because we wanted the public to understand that, these pictures are old and that sometimes things happen to them. But where it was feasible and there was not too much damage, we tried to fix them. Here's a classroom pose shot, and you can see that it's a mixed race classroom. He also photographed an all-black school before the schools were integrated in the early 1900s, and you see that in the exhibit. The framed photo up in the upper left there is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the poet. Then here's some of the other thematic sections. There's the section on railroads, the river, which is mostly the Delaware, but there are a couple other rivers in the show. The Jersey Shore, nature, which includes some both landscape views as well as some still life that he did of flowers and fruit and things like that. And then the fair, which in those days was the Trenton Interstate Fair, which later became the New Jersey State Fair. And there's some wonderful photos from that section. Here is a few sample images from those themes. This is from rails. There's a number of disaster photos involving railroads in the exhibit. Here's a train station, Rocky Hill. The train doesn't stop there anymore. Here's a lantern slide from the nature section. You can see how he very carefully labeled his slides. He's got the rubber stamp Grant Castner photo. He's got the date, that he's in Trenton, New Jersey, and then on the right he's got the title of the picture, and then a printed label with the name of the camera club at the bottom. So now let's take a closer look at, I'm going to first show you some canal photos and then some river photos, and then we'll open it up for questions. There's three canals that we're going to look at. The Delaware and Raritan Canal in New Jersey, which includes the feeder canal, which starts in up north of Lambertville and comes down to Bordentown, and that brings water to the canal, which then runs to New Brunswick from the Delaware. The Delaware Canal in Pennsylvania, which runs along the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware, and the water power canal in Trenton. This is a long forgotten canal that ran right through the center of the city. And as the name implies, it was used to power industries in middle of Trenton. So here's a towpath. This is called On the Towpath. He titled this one, and this is a pleasant view of the gently winding tree-lined waterway, and in the distance there's a wooden bridge. Very serene scene. There's a mule-drawn canal boat. And a lot of times we think about the canal as the boats on the canal as being pulled by mules. But by 1894, there were also power boats on the canal. But people still used mule-drawn boats. And you can see there's a couple of people walking, just enjoying enjoying a nice outdoor walk here. And that sort of foreshadows its current use as a state park and exclusively for recreational purposes. And then behind the two people is the mule team that's pulling the boat that you can kind of see in the distance there. This one is called Canal Boat Village. And the woman in the foreground might be Castner's sister, Ida, who, as I mentioned, often appears in his photos. Uh, there's Bordentown was selected as the western terminus of the Delaware and Raritan Canal because the Delaware River farther north tended to freeze in the winter. Choosing this location meant that they could keep the canal open so that it would be connected from Philadelphia. You know, you could come up the Delaware and then go to New Brunswick and vice versa by boat through most of the winter months before it would freeze. Now here's another view of boat building at Bordentown. This one was called ship construction. And we don't know exactly what kind of ship this was. It could have been a canal boat, but it could also have been the hull for a steamboat. This is a different type of canal boat. Um, and it was something I had no knowledge of before getting involved with Castner. This particular boat was called a sectional boat or a hinge boat. On hinge-style boats, two separate sections were connected by metal fittings and pins. When the pins were removed, the two sections became two boats. They would each float. So, you know, it's like two boats that are hooked together. But once you took the two parts apart, you could then maneuver them, and that made it easier to turn the boats around or go around a sharp curve in the canal. Uh, the man standing in the left foreground here can be seen wearing a uniform and leaning on a rifle. He's guarding Mercer County prisoners working the quarry. And there's still the Mercer County Workhouse as you go north on Route 29 towards Lambertville after you leave Trenton, go north. So this is somewhere in that area there. These workers produce tons of crushed stone for use on the county's roadways. This is one image from the water power canal. And the buildings that you see there are part of the old Trenton Waterworks before it moved to its current location. The bridge, which is no longer there, carried Calhoun Street. Another beautifully composed image. And interesting that he titled it Old Age rather than Water Power Canal at Calhoun Street. Uh, he's giving it a more metaphoric title, and he's drawing your attention to the man walking along the canal rather than just the canal itself. Now, this is on the Pennsylvania side. The Delaware Canal, also known as the Delaware Division of the Pennsylvania Canal, stretched from Morrisville to Easton. It was first opened in the 1830s, and it was originally intended to transport anthracite coal and other materials down to Philadelphia. In 1897, Castner took this photograph from atop a carriage road bridge, now River Road, that crossed the Delaware Canal just south of Irwina. On the right, you can see a building. That was a tavern and inn for those who were traveling on the canal. And it's still in business, and it's called the Golden Pheasant Inn. This is the Shaky Bridge in Trenton, right near the current waterworks along Route 29. In 1908, Trenton needed a bridge to span the rushing torrent of water that tumbled from the higher ground of the Delaware and Raritan Canal feeder down to the Delaware River via a spillway called the Waste Weir. And the city hired John A. Roebling's Sons Company, which was located in Trenton, to build the bridge, which they designed as a miniature version of their famed 1855 railroad suspension bridge over the Niagara River. And it was originally called the Little Roebling Bridge. But if you've ever walked over it, you'll know why it got the nickname the Shaky Bridge. In 2022, the bridge was repaired and rededicated, and the gent with the sunglasses there is Trenton Mayor Reed Gusciora, who's cutting a ribbon. Now, um, Castner titled this "Snapshot State Street," which snapshot's a funny term, to me for something that is as carefully composed as this image. The term snapshot goes back to Sir John Herschel around 1860 in England, who was one of the inventors of different types of photographs back then. And he said in the future, we'll be able to take pictures so quickly that it'll be like snapshots, taking a term from hunting. Uh, but in any case, this is a view of in Trenton, and it's taken where the canal, if it's covered over today, but it's where East State Street crosses over Route 1. That's where this picture is located, and it shows a boat coming up the canal, and it's going by a bridge which has been opened that you see in the foreground, because that would swing out to the left and you could go over the bridge. So the bridge has been swung open, and now this boat is a power boat, can then come through the bridge. Beautiful composition with that triangle, and then you look through there. And then on the top, you can see there's a sign which says driving or passing over the bridge at a faster gait than a walk is forbidden under penalty of a fine and as provided by law. So now we'll look at a few Delaware River views, and then we'll close this up. So here we see the ferry Philadelphia uh, that's departing Kane's Point in Camden. In 1888, the ferry was reorganized as the Delaware River Ferry Company of New Jersey, and it continued operating until 1938. But ferry traffic declined after the opening of the Delaware Bridge, which is for railroads, in 1896. and then the Delaware Bridge, now called the Ben Franklin Bridge, in 1926. So it lasted a few years after the Ben Franklin Bridge opened. But this was the way to get to Philadelphia from New Jersey, is you'd take a ferry back in those days. And here's the Canes Point Ferry House. And on the left there, you can see there's a sign that says Atlantic City. And Atlantic City was there because the Philadelphia and Atlantic City Railroad routed its trains into Canes Point. So you could take a train from, let's say, Atlantic City, you would go to this ferry terminal, and then you would take the ferry over to Philadelphia. You could also take ferries from this terminal to Atlantic City directly without taking the railroad. It took longer, but it was a nice scenic ride. Here's a view along the Delaware River north of Riverton. Just a beautiful landscape photo. Again, very well composed. These houses were built in the early 19th century when the small hamlet of Raven Rock developed from the nearby northern terminus of the Delaware and Feeder Canal. The houses are still standing to this day and can be observed on Route 29, just north of the entrance to the Bulls Island Recreation Area. But the road is much closer to the river than seen in this picture. Uh, there's uh, there's sort of a grassy expanse between the road and these houses. This one is called Watching the Fish, and this is I'll try to pronounce this Hockey Hokaki Creek at Milford runs into the Delaware, and this picture probably was taken from where the train goes by there. And this is pretty close to where Castner grew up in Belvidere. So he's probably familiar with this area. This photograph shows one of the 10 covered bridges that connected New Jersey and neighboring Pennsylvania. Um, all these bridges, of course, are gone. This particular bridge was destroyed in a flood in October 1903. Lacey's shad fishery is believed to have operated at a place called Hog Hole in Morris Island, sometimes called Lacey's Island, on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware, among the three more well-known islands, Moon Island, Biles Island, and Duck Island. So he was on the Pensy side of the river taking this photo. And of course, shad fishing still goes on today in the Delaware. Here's another view that he took of shad fishing. This picture showing boys, you know, probably just after or just before going for a swim in the Delaware. Uh, Several days after Castner snapped the picture, the Trenton Evening Times reported that one of the swimmers, John Holderman, had been struck in the head by a horse's kick and died at St. Francis Hospital in Trenton. There's no hint of Holderman's imminent fate in this bucolic scene, which is reminiscent of Thomas Aiken's photographs and paintings of young male swimmers in the 1880s. This is a lovely view of the river taken early in the morning. Um, Kastner probably went out photographing before he had to attend to his magazine work. And he would probably take his bicycle. He had a two-wheeled bike. It was called safety bicycle in those days to distinguish it from the older bikes that had one really big wheel and one small wheel. And in the 1890s, these bikes became very common in use, and both men and women used them. And there's some images of bicycles in the exhibit. including one with Castner on his bike. So my guess is that he took a bike ride with his camera equipment, probably around dawn or just before dawn, and got to this position on a bridge and made this lovely view. And here's Castner himself. He's the guy with the mustache behind the other guy. They're having a July 4th picnic here along the Delaware near Yardley. The man on the ground in front of Castner is a little hard to see, but he's actually holding a revolver and pointing it sort of in the general direction of the woman that's looking back towards him in front of the tree. And she's got a smile on her face, but also seems to be cringing a little bit at the same time. And he probably has this gun so that he can shoot it off to celebrate Independence Day. But it's an interesting photo in that it depicts courtship rituals, let's say, something like that, back in this time period. And this is before Kastner got married, so he's out there with a group, probably all single young adults, having a good time along the river. This area in Hamilton Township with basically, looks like a swamp, but he entitled it "Where the Frogs Love to Croak." So it was not as quiet a place as it might seem. Probably took this picture somewhere near Crosswicks Creek. In 1898, one of Kastner's images of Decoud's Meadows, possibly this one, received high praise at the first annual exhibition of the Trenton Photographic Society. He also made a lantern slide of this print, so he must have valued it as one of his favorites. And this is another lovely view that he took. The same general area, which he called Reflections and Shadows. And this one was one of only a few known published photos by Castner during his career as a photographer. And it was published in Photo Era, which was a magazine for amateur photographers in 1916. Now, this is one of the few prints that are in the Castner archive at the State Museum. It's a cyanotype. Obviously, it's blue. It's something like a blueprint, which architects used to use. And this process was actually invented by that fellow Herschel that I mentioned earlier back in the 1840s. But it became popular in the 1890s among amateurs because it was so easy to do. Uh, it was printed in the sun, uh, and it was developed in water. So you had to sensitize it with a light sensitive iron compound. But once it was sensitized, and then you would contact print your negative on it with a piece of glass, so with your negative on top of the paper, and then you would just put the paper in water and the picture appears. So it's very easy to use. And it's kind of like a proof, what we would call a proof print. So this particular picture shows the Delaware River with a lot of ice in it. And so Castner went out in inclement weather, cold weather, to take photos. And then this, I think, is our last one that we're going to look at. This is actually one of his lantern slides. It's called Evening at the Docks, taken in Camden. And in 1903, he exhibited a framed print of this image at the Trenton Photographic Society's fourth annual exhibition held at the School of Industrial Arts. The photograph was so well admired that it was one of 10 submissions chosen to hang permanently inside the school. Unfortunately, the print's current whereabouts, if it exists, is unknown. So if any of you folks have this print, please let me know. I'd certainly like to see it. I'm just going to close here. Got about a minute left to just make some concluding remarks about Kastner. Kastner's work is more distinguished by what he chose to photograph than how he photographed. Collectively, his work comprises a visual history of how he responded to people, places, and events, especially in Trenton. Some of his subjects were those that probably appealed more to men than women photographers, such as his pictures of automobiles or firefighters, which are in the exhibit. But others could have been taken by a woman, for example, his very good photos of children. What is consistent about his work is its clarity of expression and directness. The viewer of his photographs can immediately grasp what he wanted you to see, and he achieves this aim primarily through orderly compositions enabled by careful placement of his tripod, and when people were moving, the right moment to trigger the shutter. He would have agreed with the quotation by Francis Bacon that legendary New Jersey-born photographer Dorothea Lange kept on her darkroom door. Quote, the contemplation of things as they are, without error or confusion, without substitution or imposture, is in itself a nobler thing than a whole harvest of invention, end quote. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Gary. Well, we certainly take your questions now. So if people do have questions, please feel free to send them to us using the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be happy to address them. Is it possible to view or research the collection? And if so, like get electronic copies of some of those images?
I'm going to stop my share here. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Uh, you would have to contact Nicholas Chitola at the New Jersey State Museum to do that. The images have all been digitized, but only 100 of them of the negatives have been printed. So at this point, it would require looking at a computer with digital images to do research in the collection.
Um, for the train station location, was that Big Rocky Hill or Little Rocky Hill, if you know?
I think it's the Rocky Hill that's near Princeton, but I don't have any more information about it.
Um, is there a museum catalog available from the exhibition?
Uh, Nicholas Chitola and I have prepared most of a book about Castner that's based on the exhibit, but we do not yet have a contract with a publisher. So I'm hoping, but that's where we're at. That's where we're at right now.
Are there any plans to put the entire catalog of scanned images online into an accessible collection?
That's a good idea, but I don't know of a plan to do so at the moment. Maybe that's something that you'd be interested in doing, Andrew, because because I know the state library is getting more involved in posting digital images online. I think that the State Museum has limited resources to do something like that, but maybe the State Library would be interested.
Um, what can Grant Castner's collection tell us about photography in the Trenton area at the time, maybe as a whole?
Well, they were both amateurs and professionals. There were professional portrait studios, some very good ones in Trenton. The photography in Trenton starts in 1841. It really goes back a long way. Um, by Kastner's era in the 1880s, there were quite a few very good portrait studios in Trenton that continued after 1900. And as amateur photography spread, the professionals had to somewhat adjust what they did. They had to distinguish what they did from the snapshots that most of the amateurs were taking. So the portraiture actually became more art inflected, I would say, after 1900. Photographers had to show that they could do something, the professionals had to show that they could do something that the amateurs could not. Um, Professionals also did all sorts of commercial photography for all the industries in Trenton that were needed for advertising, to do their product catalogs and all kinds of things. And then you have social event photography starts in the 1900s also. Although in the early 1900s, most people getting married, they would go to a studio and have a formal portrait done, rather than have a photographer, shoot the wedding as they did later. Um, where else we could go? Castner, the other members of the Castner of the Trenton Camera Club uh, took some of the same subjects as Castner did. They liked going to places like the Trenton Battle Monument and going up to the top and taking bird's eye views of the city. Castner would go on outings with other camera members. Sometimes they would take the train. For example, they went to Tennant, New Jersey. They went to Old Tennant Church and took pictures there. The very important church during the Battle of Monmouth. There were wounded who were taken there during the battle, and so they liked going to places together. One of his good buddies was John Neary, who was not one of the original members of the Camera Club, but he joined not too long thereafter. And Neary is buried very close to Castner in Greenwood Cemetery.
Can you speak more to the photographs of African Americans in the collection?
Uh, yeah, he visited African Americans. Maybe he was on his bicycle, touring around, and the one I showed you is visiting an African American family at home. There's some others in the exhibit of a different family that lived closer to Trenton than the one that I showed you. He also photographed African Americans at work. In the exhibit, there's a guy who is shining shoes at a railroad station of what looks to be a conductor. And there are also pictures of African Americans taken at the Interstate Fair. There's a group of women from the Johnson family that's on display in the exhibit. And there's also some photos of African American workers at the fair who are dealing with the horses there. So they do appear in a number of different contexts.
Um, what about what about Kastner's photography most captured your imagination?
Most captured my imagination. Uh, well, I I feel that he did what a lot of later photographers did, and that is he was interested in a lot of different things. He came from you might say a journalism background, because he had published his own newspaper. He was a well-read guy, and so different things appealed to him. And that's why we have 11 different sections in the exhibit. He didn't just do one thing. He did a lot of different types of photos over a period of time. So it doesn't look like he concentrated on one series and then he went to another and then he went to another, as some photographers do today. Whereas other people that, they just take their camera with them and then they find things that appeal to them. And he was more in that group. Um, I respect very much, his diligence at lugging those glass plates around, taking all these pictures. It was not easy to do, even in the gelatin dry plate era. Uh, he worked hard at it. He's obviously devoted to his craft.
How much would you say everything weighed that he would have to carry around at that time?
Uh, I, it depended on the size of the camera that he took with him. He had different sized cameras. So if he had to take an 8 by 10 camera with him, the camera itself with the lens probably weighed 20 pounds. And then he might have had another 10 or 20 pounds of glass plates. But I think usually when he traveled, let's say on his bicycle, he would have a 4 by 5 camera, and that would weigh less. So, maybe 10 to 20 pounds of stuff.
Somebody mentioned that the train station was located at Rocky Hill, where Route 518 crosses Canal Road.
Yeah, that's the Rocky Hill that I assumed it to be. Just say if anybody has any prints by Castner, please contact the New Jersey State Museum. I'd be certainly interested to see those and maybe make copies of them if they didn't want to donate them. Um, because, there's just a handful of prints in the collection, and I'm sure he made prints. We know that he made prints. They were exhibited. I'm sure he made a lot more. Uh, just one thing I didn't mention is that the negatives go up to the 1920s, and he lived for another 20 years after that. I assume that he kept photographing, but he probably switched to film, and either because the film disintegrated, because the film back then was not very stable, or because it just didn't end up with the collection. Um, we don't have any of his film negatives. And so we don't have much for his later period, like what did he photograph in the 1930s? If he, assuming that he did, um, maybe some of the prints from that era will turn up somewhere.
Somebody said, I have some portrait photos from St. Mary's Dewan School in Burlington. The studios identified for these women's photos are mostly from New York City and Philadelphia. Maybe Trenton was not prestigious enough to draw from as photographers.
Well, I've I've been cataloging New Jersey photographers for quite a while, and on my website, Soretsky.com, I've got a list of more than 3,000 of them, and they're from all 21 New Jersey counties. However, the writer makes a point here, and that is that often when you look at collections of photos of New Jersey people, they will be from New York or Philadelphia studios. Uh, Maybe people were going on a day trip, and one of the things they did while they were in the city, the big city, was to go to a portrait studio. At some of the county historical societies, they have collections of photos of local residents, and often they're from the ones from Burlington and Gloucester, for example. A lot of the photos there are from Philadelphia studios. But there were local photographers that people went to because there were some very good ones. For example, in Mount Holly, there were very good photographers. So it's a mixed situation. People did go to local ones, but they also went to ones in the cities, big cities. I just want to give a shout out here to my cousin in London who's watching this. Thank you for tuning in, Simon. That's London, England, not London, Connecticut. Well, not actually London, but he lives not too far from London.
Somebody asked if I could post your website, so I sent that out to everybody.
Yeah, sure.
So if
Yeah.
you want more information, please visit it.
Yep.
All right, Gary, anything you want to close with as we
Well, I just want to
sort of
thank you, Andrew, for inviting me, and thank the audience for attending. And Be glad to answer any questions people have if they want to write to me. There's a contact button on my webpage.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Gary. It was a fantastic presentation, and thank you everybody for attending today. If you haven't had a chance, please, if you can, try to get over to the museum before the exhibit ends in September, and see this, forgotten piece of Trenton photography history, which is fantastic. So again, thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks again. Bye, folks.